Okay, in this video, we are going to discuss the stages of sleep, the mechanisms of sleep, and sleep disorders. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you. PowerPoint slides. Okay, so sleep is a specialized state evolved to serve particular functions, and we're going to begin by talking about the mechanisms for producing sleep and the stages of sleep. So again, sleep is a state where the brain actively produces particular types of waves. These waves show a decrease in brain activity and a decreased response to stimuli. Sleep as an altered state of consciousness importantly differs from coma, vegetative state, minimally conscious state, and brain death. So in coma, it's defined as extended periods of unconsciousness characterized by low brain activity that remains fairly steady. So a person shows little response to stimuli. This differs, however, from a vegetative state. Here, a person alternates between periods of sleep and moderate arousal, but no awareness of surroundings, right? As opposed to little response, here we have no awareness of surroundings. There's some autonomic arousal to painful stimuli, but no purposeful activity or response to speech. A minimally conscious state is defined as one stage higher than a vegetative state, marked by occasional brief periods of purposeful action and limited speech comprehension. Brain death is characterized by no sign of brain activity and no response to any stimuli. Now, one way that researchers can determine what stage of consciousness or alertness one is in is by using EEG. The electroencephalograph allows researchers to discover the various stages of sleep or these other altered states of consciousness. We can compare brain activity at different times during sleep. A polysomnograph is a combination of an EEG or the brain waves along with recordings of eye movements. I'd like to show you some EEG recordings of the stages of sleep and a brief description of each stage. And so our stages of sleep are approximately 90-minute cycles, and the longer it is into the night, the time that we spend in these stages shifts. But generally speaking, in stage one, we have a mixture of alpha and theta waves. These are characterized by low voltage or low amplitude and fast activity waves. When we begin stage one, we exhibit alpha waves, and once we move deeper into stage one, going into stage two, we start to see theta waves. Stage two is characterized by K complexes and sleep spindles. So sleep spindles are these bursts of 12 to 14 hertz waves, and K complexes have one large negative wave followed by one large positive wave. So it's like these spikes in neural activity. Stage 3 and 4 consists of delta waves. They are the largest and the slowest. This is considered your deep sleep stages. And then we have REM or sometimes called paradoxical sleep. It's called that because the brain waves are that of an alert individual. However, their activation in different areas of the brain are reduced. So here are descriptions of the stages of sleep in some more detail. As I was saying before, alpha waves are present when one begins a state of relaxation. We can see these types of waves in an individual who's in a meditative state as well. So stage 1 is when sleep has just begun. The EEG is dominated by irregular, jagged, and low voltage brain waves. And brain activity begins to decline. And again, as we move deeper into stage 1 sleep, we start producing theta waves, which have a lower frequency and higher amplitude brain waves than alpha waves. Now, in stage 1 sleep, it's relatively easy to wake a person. They even report sometimes that they weren't asleep when awoken during stage 1. Again, stage 2 is characterized by the presence of sleep spindles, which are these 12 to 14 hertz waves that go in bursts, and they about a half a second burst of these particular brain waves. And K complexes are sharp waves associated with temporary inhibition of neuronal firing. As time goes on, we move into what's called slow wave or deep sleep. Stage 3 and 4 together constitute the slow wave sleep. And the EEG shows slow, larger amplitude waves and highly synchronized neuronal activity. It's thought that in this slow wave deep sleep is when restorative functions are happening. Again, paradoxical or REM sleep is rapid eye movement sleep, and it's described by periods characterized by rapid eye movements. And again, it's known as paradoxical sleep because there's deep sleep in some ways, but light sleep in other ways. Muscles are controlled. One is not able to move portions of their body. However, there's rapid movement of eyes. This is the point in the sleep cycle where most dreams occur, but people have reported having dreams in other phases of sleep. Right, so the postural muscles of the body are more relaxed than other stages, but they're also, there's an inability to move them. Okay, so stages other than REM are referred to as non-REM sleep. So stage 1 through 4 are non-REM sleep. And we move through these stages sequentially. After about an hour, the person begins to cycle back through the stages from stage 4 to stages 3, 2, and then REM. So the sequence repeats, and each cycle lasts approximately 90 minutes. Stages 3 and 4 sleep predominate early in the night, and the length of stages decreases as the night progresses. REM sleep is predominant later at night, and the length increases as the night progresses. REM sleep is strongly associated with dreaming, like I said before, but people also report dreaming in other stages of sleep. Okay, so let's talk about some brain mechanisms of wakefulness and arousal. So early on in the semester, when we were talking about the basic neuroanatomy, we did mention the reticular formation, and there's various brain areas that that are associated with the reticular formation, right? It's part of the midbrain, and it extends from the medulla to the forebrain. And again, it plays a role in arousal or wakefulness. The pontomesencephalon is part of the reticular formation in the midbrain, and this area contributes to cortical arousal. There are axons that extend to the hypothalamus, the thalamus, and the basal forebrain, which releases acetylcholine, glutamate, and dopamine. Right, so this area produces excitatory effects to widespread areas of the cortex. Stimulation of this area can awaken sleeping individuals and increases alertness in those already awake. The locus coeruleus also plays a role in wakefulness and arousal. It's a small structure in the pons, and the axons release norepinephrine to arouse various areas of the cortex and increase wakefulness. Right, so this area is usually dormant while asleep. The hypothalamus contains neurons that release histamine to produce widespread excitatory effects throughout the brain. If any of you have taken antihistamines for allergies, they produce sleepiness, which I'm sure you're aware of. There's, labels, don't take these and then operate heavy machinery, so on. Okay, orexin. It's a peptide neurotransmitter and is sometimes called hypocretin. It's released by the lateral and posterior nuclei of the hypothalamus. It's needed to stay awake rather than to wake out of a sleeping state. Orexin is released by cells into the basal forebrain to stimulate neurons responsible for wakefulness and arousal. And the basal forebrain is an area just anterior and dorsal to the hypothalamus. So just remember your directions here. GABA and acetylcholine are neurotransmitters. There are cells that are receptive to these in the basal forebrain. The inhibition that is provided by GABA is essential for sleep. Other axons from the basal forebrain release acetylcholine, which is excitatory and increases arousal. Right, so the basal forebrain is responsible for both inhibitory and excitatory responses. Okay, so sleep and inhibition of brain activity. Of course, GABA, the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter, plays a role here. It functions to decrease the temperature and one's metabolic rate, as well as decreasing the stimulation of neurons. Now, sleep can be localized within the brain. Sleepwalkers are awake in one part of the brain and asleep in others. Lucid dreaming is when one is dreaming but aware of being asleep and dreaming. And the pons remaining in REM while other brain areas wake up causes the inability to move. I don't know if any of you have experienced sleep paralysis before, but it's quite frightening actually when it happens. And it's nice to have an explanation of what's going on, right? So the pons is functioning as if we're still in REM and other brain areas are awake. So there's consciousness, there's alertness, but that sleep paralysis is still happening based on what's going on in the pons. Here is a nice figure that I've found by your publisher that lists the structures, the neurotransmitters that are involved and their effects on behavior. Okay, so REM sleep. There's activity increases in the pons and in the limbic system. activity decreases in the visual cortex, the motor cortex, and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. REM sleep is associated with distinctive patterns of high amplitude electrical potentials known as PGO waves. These are waves of neural activity that are detected first in the pons, and then they are sent to the lateral geniculate of the hypothalamus and then the occipital cortex. REM deprivation results in high density of PGO waves during uninterrupted sleep. Cells in the pons send messages to the spinal cord, which inhibits motor neurons that control the body's large muscles. It prevents motor movements during REM sleep. REM is also regulated by serotonin and acetylcholine. Drugs that stimulate acetylcholine receptors quickly move people to REM, and serotonin interrupts REM. Right? Here's a figure that shows the PGO waves during REM sleep. Again, being sent to the lateral geniculate nucleus in the thalamus and to the occipital cortex. Okay, so those are the mechanisms of sleep. Now let's just list and describe some sleep disorders. So insomnia is a sleep disorder associated with inadequate amounts of sleep. It can be caused by a number of factors, including noise, stress, pain, diet, medication. I don't know if some of you are experiencing this during the pandemic. Your sleep patterns may be disrupted due to stress and just lack of structure, really. Insomnia can be the result of disorders such as epilepsy, Parkinson's disease, depression, anxiety, other conditions. A dependence on sleeping pills or alcohol can shift the circadian rhythm, and it can also result in insomnia. Sleep apnea is characterized by the inability to breathe while sleeping for a prolonged period of time. The consequences are sleepiness during the day, impaired attention, depression, sometimes heart problems. It could be genetic, it could be due to hormones or old age, obesity, and deterioration of brain mechanisms that control breathing. And with the loss of sleep, cognitive impairment may result. This effect is listed particularly under sleep apnea, but again, sleep deprivation, generally speaking, can impair performance, especially after 17 hours of sleep deprivation. Narcolepsy is a disorder characterized by frequent periods of sleepiness. There's attacks of sleepiness during the day, it could be gradual or sudden. There's occasional cataplexy where muscles weaken and can be triggered by strong emotions. Sleep paralysis is the inability to move while falling asleep or waking up. Hypnagogic hallucinations, dreamlike experiences while awake. These can all be under this category of narcolepsy. There seems to be a genetic link because it seems to run in families, but no gene has been identified. Could be caused by lack of hypothalamic cells that produce and release orexin. Primary treatment is with stimulant drugs such as Ritalin. They increase wakefulness by enhancing dopamine and norepinephrine activity. Then we have periodic limb movement disorder. It's the repeated involuntary movement of the legs and sometimes the arms while sleeping. Legs kick once every 20 to 30 seconds for periods of minutes to hours. Usually occurs during non-REM sleep, which again are the stages that are other than REM sleep. REM behavior disorder is associated with vigorous movements during REM sleep, usually associated with acting out of dreams. Research suggests that inadequate GABA and other inhibitory transmitters may be responsible. And then we have night terrors and sleepwalking. So night terrors are experiences of intense anxiety from which a person awakens screaming in terror. It usually occurs during non-REM sleep. Sleepwalking also runs in families. It mostly occurs in young children and occurs mostly in stage 3 or 4 sleep. So sleepwalking is not associated with dreaming. It is not dangerous to wake a sleepwalker. There's a condition similar to sleepwalking, which is called sexsomnia. It's when engaging in sexual behaviors while asleep. It can pose a threat to romances and marriage. Okay. All right. Well, that's the end of the sleep mechanisms and the disorders that are associated with sleep. In the next video, we're going to talk about the functions, the possible functions and the hypotheses to explain why we sleep and why we dream. Great.